Now, I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker, Alex Koulakov. Alex is a theoretical physicist and a neuroscientist. He is the Charles Robertson Professor of Neuroscience at the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. Alex's group has used mathematics and theoretical physics to explore the brain, with focus on neural computation, brain development, and the evolution of brain architecture for optimal function. He received the Sloan Fellowship in Theoretical Neuroscience from 1998 to 2001 and the NIH Director's Transformative Research Award in 2018. Alex's research has been featured in media outlets including Physics Today, Wired, Nautilus Magazine, Medical Express, Long Island Business News, and Scientific Inquirer. Today, Alex is going to be giving us a talk titled From Neurons to Newtons, What Can the Brain Teach Us About Physics? So Alex, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here and to talk about this wonderful topic. This is what you can see here is Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. It's located in the place where it used to be a small whaling village, but now we're working on trying to figure out how the brain works. And we're trying to work on the interface between artificial intelligence and neuroscience. If you are interested in these topics, please contact me if you'd like to visit. If you have similar views, it would be interesting, or similar interests, it would be interesting to discuss. I would like to talk today about this topic, which I think I started thinking about it when I was contacted by FirstPrinciples first a few months ago. I think it's a very entertaining question. Can neuroscience help us understand physics? Usually the arrow is pointing in the other direction. There are a lot of physics tools that are present in neuroscience, obviously advanced microscopes, and a lot of physicists like myself went from physics to neuroscience, so there is a lot of contribution of physics and physicists to neuroscience. And I will talk about, since then, I basically came up with 3 potential interesting developments in that direction, from neuroscience to physics. And my talk will have 3 chapters, and some of them have some data, and some of them will be extremely conceptual, especially close to the end. So the first topic will be bottlenecks and the evolution of brain development and physics, and this will basically describe how we attempt to think about the evolution of brain development in terms of algorithmic terms. So this is the interesting paradox, which has been noticed many years ago by the founder of modern neural development theories and concepts, Roger Sperry. And the argument and the idea is that there is an enormous expansion of information that goes on during neural development. So the genome contains about 1 gigabyte of information, and just by the counting of the number of nucleotides in the human genome. And cortical networks include, they can encode substantially larger amount of information, about 5 orders of magnitude, about 400 terabytes. And just because it's difficult to understand what 400 terabytes means, I'd like to convert it to the movies for you, because it's a lot easier, especially for American audience, to understand information in movie terms. So 400 terabytes, it basically means 45 years of continuous high-definition video streaming. So, and that network is created during neural development from information in the genome, which is about 1 gigabyte, which is about 1 hour of video. So that sets up some kind of paradox. How is it possible that there's obviously not enough information in the genome to instruct creation of cortical networks to high detail. And this paradox was noticed a long time ago, and it was used actually to figure out the rules of how neurons connect to each other in some very exciting fashion. So the good news here is that whatever distinguishes mouse brain, from human brain, which is encoded in, both of them are encoded in the genome, is contained in a small instructional video of about 1 hour, which is about 1 hour long. So we can, in principle, grasp that difference if we understand the rules, the differences in the rules of development. But the bad news is that there's some kind of paradox here. And the paradox is, of course, very superficial because the genome contains the program. So it's the different measures. So genome information is a program, so it measures the complexity of cortical networks. And it also is measured in bytes. For example, the program to create cortical network can be very simple. Set up a random network, which will be very short, and it can create an arbitrarily large network. So, but obviously, cortical network is not random. So we are trying to understand what are the rules that create the cortical architecture that is capable of intelligence. And so one of those interesting rules is set up by this point, is that in addition to this red arrow, which signifies the conversion from the neural development, when the brain is created from the information in the genome, there is also the blue arrow, which is when the genome when the brain information in the brain is converted back into the genome. And of course, I'm not talking about some kind of Lamarckian evolution here. I'm talking about just the natural selection, right? So the selection will keep DNA of brains which are the fittest, right? So there is information flow, although kind of weak, from the brains into the genomes. So as a result, in the course of evolution, our cortex has undergone millions of cycles of attraction, of expansion and contraction, which we call a genomic bottleneck. So essentially, on every evolution, the brain is passing through this what is called genomic bottleneck. So we published this research and these ideas in the paper in PNAS, which you can read. And I'll just briefly review that idea, and I try to argue that it actually has relevance to building physics theories in the end. See if we can buy this argument. So so what does it mean? What does it mean in terms of the brain fitness and brain architecture, that it has to go through a narrow information channel on each generation? It means essentially that the rules which are selected in the genome are packable. So because our evolution doesn't have a luxury of storing every synapse in the genome, it has to keep only the most essential rules, the ones that generalize across different environments or different tasks, or they can be useful for the next generation. And that leads to the genomic bottleneck hypothesis. That the idea is that this cortex passing through the narrow information channel, which we call genomic bottleneck, had led to the distillation of important information about statistics of the outside world and to the emergence of general intelligence. There are many ways how information in the genome can be represented in brain architecture. It can be, for example, be represented in the learning rules. But as a starting point, we started thinking about innate behaviors. So innate behaviors, which animals and humans display right after their birth, right after their brains are formed, or even before their brains are formed. They can be quite complex. And I'm listing here several of them. My favorite is, of course, newborn turtles, but many of us can relate to the phenomenon of baby geniuses. So there is also many animals are capable of walking right after birth. Spiders can build their webs. Birds can fly. There's also a very interesting extension of this into the Chomsky's idea about innateness of capacity for language, which, if it's innate, it has to be passed through the genome. So the turtles are interesting because the turtles are born in complete darkness. So they hatch in the sand they've never seen anything else in the outside world, outside their egg, and they come out. They wait for the nightfall to come out, and then they run towards the shore to just avoid predators as fast as possible. And obviously, this behavior is quite complex, and also it comes from the genome. So the idea is that genomes, despite their small information capacity, can encode large amounts of information. So this is how we approach it, this problem, in sort of machine learning AI terms. So we assume that so there is this green network, which is the network representing cortex, or a network which is solving some task. It takes input X and generate output Y. And this network is generated by it's called PNet. So PNet is a phenotypic network which is created after the brains are fully formed. So this network is created by another network which we call GNet. It's a genomic network. And what the genomic network is taking as inputs is the information representing a couple of neurons. So if GNet generates a pair between neuron I and neuron J, it will take a vector representing neuron I and neuron J, and this vector, multidimensional vector, will contain molecular expression levels of molecules, if we want to map it back to the biology, that are describing the identity of those two neurons. And this is, roughly speaking, how our framework works. So it does have kind of reminiscence of something called chemoaffinity hypothesis, the idea that neurons connect based on the molecular labels that they express, and they can recognize and they can form a synapse or not to form a synapse based on the information from multiple molecular labels that they produce. And so the GNet is this genetic network or genomic network is supposed to express the logic of interaction of molecular labels. And as we refine the phenotypic network, we can flow the gradients into the GNet and adjust the GNet to produce the higher performance phenotypic network. Importantly, GNet can be compressed substantially. So we know that in nature, the networks that determine interactions between molecular labels are about 5 orders of magnitude smaller than, for example, the cortical network. So we're not capable yet of the 5 orders of magnitude compression, but we are probably closing in on maybe 3 orders of magnitude. Maybe at this point I'll pause and ask questions if there are any, or I ask you to ask.
If anyone has questions up to this point, again, just hit the raise hand function. Sometimes it's hidden on the screen. You may need to hit the 3 dots to raise your hand. I see already a question from Rise. I am going to give you, Rise, the opportunity. Go ahead.
Hi, Alex. This is very interesting. So if I understand correctly, the GNet is some sort of a neural, like in terms of AI systems, it's like a DNN. And the input are like neurons and they are mapped. The output should also be a neuron, but they are like now connected with some sort of, it's like we're giving, in terms of ontology, we could be like, we're giving subject and object, and some predicate is formed in the GNet to connect them and form cortical networks. Is that like the right way to understand this?
So both of them are networks. I'm replacing them with boxes. So the PNet is a network. I'm representing it in a very abstract fashion. But yes, like it's basically a weight matrix in some network. For example, MNIST or CFAR, like performing some visual task, visual recognition task, or a transformer, right? So it would be concretely, it will be like a weight matrix, the PNet. The GNet is also a network. It's just a network creating a network.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting.
The network takes pairs. It takes pairs of that represent pairs of inputs that represent the particular position in the cortical network that we are creating.
Okay.
Makes sense? And
Thank you.
Awesome. And I see another question from Colin. Colin, you can go ahead and ask away.
All right, yeah. So I think I have a question that's essentially a variation of the nature versus nurture question. But when you're saying that 1 gigabyte of genetic information results in this like 400 terabytes of information in the brain, how much of that would you say is in that starting genetic information? How much in that 400 terabytes is determined by the starting information, that 1 gigabyte, or is it more to think of it as that 1 gigabyte gives you kind of the template to grow a larger system, and then the state of that system, the state of the information in that 400 terabytes is more results of perception and experience?
I mean, it's an excellent question, and I don't know the answer to that question, obviously. So it's possible that it is like both extremes are possible. It's possible that this 1 gigabyte just produces like a small fraction, maybe some lower brain regions, and cortex is completely a gray area. And it's also possible that every synapse is instructed by the genome, right? So, and then there is like zero flexibility. So both extremes are possible. In terms of just observationally, it is extremely difficult, especially like in visual areas, to change anything in the connectivity and responses of neurons after the brain is formed and after the critical window for visual development is closed. So you can, for example, raise kittens. There are experiments where kittens are raised in environments where they only see vertical stripes. And then when they look at the visual cortex, they find orientation tube neurons, but there will be slight bias towards like the vertical neurons. So experimentally, again, my intuition is that it's mostly on the nature side. There is an influence of nurture, obviously, but if you look at especially like the lower visual areas, they're essentially hardwired, and they're with some very small level of adaptation.
Yeah, makes sense. And
but I don't know, like if you ask me like what is the percentage of 400 terabyte which is created by, it could be 100%, it could be 10%.
Sure. Yeah, it sounds like, well, if a lot of the visual processes are fixed, I think that at least in the human brain, like maybe the largest fraction of the brain is devoted to the visual processing. So it's probably a large percent coming from that, from the genetic information. Yeah.
It is notoriously difficult to change just from the visual experience to change like the crude architecture of visual regions.
Right. And maybe one quick follow-up question is, if for different generations, is there any estimate of how much variability there is, how much change there is from one generation to the next in the 1 gigabyte genetic material?
It's a good question. I don't know. It would be interesting. It would be interesting to estimate it. I think like SNPs, there is like maybe 3%. They contain 3%, but many of them are synonymous. So it is a good question. I don't know the answer.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm also
substitution sites, but it's difficult to estimate because they may be involved. There's a lot of dual functions. You could have like a change sequence in the genome, and it doesn't produce a functionally different protein, but it may regulate some other proteins differently. So it's a complex question to estimate.
Sure. Sounds good. I'll let you get to the rest of the talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very interesting questions.
Awesome. Yeah, great questions coming throughout. Alex, I don't see any other hands up, so back over to you to keep working through the talk.
Yeah, so we applied this approach of compressing networks to a bunch of networks. You can read about details. So the performance in many cases is very similar. Like for example, so this is in the middle. You can see networks that solve CFAR, that recognize object in CFAR 10 data set, and their performance is very close to the fully trained network, which is that dotted line. Even though in some cases we have substantial, like in this case, there is a 361-fold compression, and there are similar results for ImageNet. But I'd like to talk about briefly about this, my favorite application of this to reinforcement learning network. So this is a half cheetah, like part of the Mujoku environment, where there's a robot which is constrained to move in 2 dimensions, controlled by 3 joints, by torques and 3 joints, and it's trained by reinforcement learning algorithm to move forward at the maximum speed. So the reward that it receives is for moving forward. I mean, this is an untrained cheetah, so it just bounces around with no particular direction. So this is, if you train the network, some multi-layer perceptron to control the cheetah by those 6 torques and the 6 joints, you would see that in many cases, it evolves some kind of weird solution, which means that it is, I think this is called reward hacking. Like for example, in many cases, it will slide on its chin, like the cheetah, the trained cheetah on the right. So this is a cheetah, half cheetah, which is initialized using GNet with about 5-fold compression. And as you can see on the left, this is cheetah's newborn, so it was just formed from like our version of neural development. And on the right, you see the adult cheetah. And as you can see, newborn cheetah basically runs with almost the same speed as adult one. Adult one ran off the field a little bit faster than the newborn one. But essentially, you have a fully functioning input from point of view of propulsion, like fully functional organism. So this is also, so initial initialization with the GNet allows you to generalize across environments. Like for example, this is a cheetah in the field of gravity, which is increased by 50%. And on the left, you can see cheetah, which is just conventionally trained with RL algorithm. And on the right, you can see GNet initialized cheetah, which was just born. And although it struggles, the one on the right can still walk, whereas the one on the left kind of, is kind of stuck. Anyway, so our argument, which we actually make quantitatively, is that in our paper is that this network compression allows generalization across environments. So I'd like to talk about physics a little bit and how does it all relate to physics. So I read this book recently, Culture and the Course of Human Evolution, where there's this interesting argument that brains and culture, they co-evolve. So they form what is called a niche. Brain matches the culture and culture matches the brain architecture. My favorite example of that is the invention of controlled use of fire. You know that when people started cooking food, they didn't have to digest food. So the limited capacity, the limited energy that our organism consumes, which is about 70 watts, most of that capacity, most of that energy actually goes into digesting food. So when we started cooking food via the controlled use of fire, some energy was released. I think about 5 watts of energy was released from our stomachs, and it went to the brain. So as a result, our cooking food and the use of fire increased our brain capacity by about 25%. So, I mean, we often joke, we say that Prometheus, when he gave humans fire, he also gave us 25% of our intelligence. But it is also probably goes much wider. There is an argument about the positive feedback loop between our foraging strategies, which are implemented by the brain, and complexity of foraging strategies, and the quality of nutrients that we receive, which further leads to development and an expansion of bigger brain. So there is this interaction between brain and culture. There are many examples for that, which you can find in that book. But the question is, can cultural phenomena form bottlenecks? And I can argue that physics is one of such bottlenecks, because physics is essentially has to be passed from generation to generation. So we have to train a generation of physicists. It probably will take about to train a person in physics about 15 to 20 years. So they have to consume everything. So physics found a way to compactify the laws of nature in such that the entire complexity of observed reality can be expressed in some simple mathematical terms, such as Maxwell's laws, Schrödinger equation. I mean, they're quite simple, and the implications of them are complex. So my argument is physics is an example of bottleneck, and the physicists, especially theoretical physicists, essentially what they do is that they try to find the simplest explanations for the most complex phenomena, and that's what they do. So if this is true, then essentially you can, in principle, so there's also one way to which I learned during my physics career, how to simplify further the rules of physics or the laws of nature, is to take phenomena from different fields and find parallels. Interesting example, for example, is the symmetry breaking, which was first discovered in condensed matter physics in superconductivity, and including Higgs mechanism. Apparently, Higgs mechanism was discovered by Phil Anderson, and it then went into particle theory and particle physics, and that crosstalk between different, and I give here some other examples, this crosstalk between different fields of physics can lead to further, and it does lead to further simplification of physics rules, and to creation of more compact physics laws. So this compactification, in principle, can be modeled by GNets, where if you have one GNet that creates networks that are descriptive of different subfields of physics, and then if you compress it further, so such GNet could, for example, receive information about the domain of knowledge, so mechanics, condensed matter, particle theory, and statistical physics. And once it receives this information, it will produce the networks which are describing, for example, language models that describe mechanics or describe condensed matter or particle theory. And so such GNet, if it's pressed to be compressed, it will start finding parallels or analogies across different fields of physics. So I think this idea of genomic bottleneck can actually lead to further distillation of information across different subfields of physics. So it is an interesting project to think about. I've done nothing about it. So I would like to brag a little bit that we have recently attempted to compress what used to be a large language model. I guess now it's a language model. It has 1.5 billion parameters. And as you can see here, so the green line is the training of the GPT-2 with genomic bottleneck, and the blue line is the baseline training, and it trains a little bit, maybe about 10 times slower, just because you have to find the distillation rules. But This is our first preliminary data on how to compress large language models. Perhaps I'll pause at this point, because this is the end of this block of my chapter, the end of this chapter of my presentation.
Yeah, super interesting. Again, we then facilitate Q&A. If anyone's got questions from that chapter in the talk, I'm happy to give you a chance to ask our speaker today. I'll give maybe 30 seconds for people to formulate thoughts or questions or comments, and if we don't have any, we can keep things moving.
Okay, I'll just hassle on. You're welcome to ask questions at any point as they emerge. I just would like to summarize that my idea here is that the unifying principles across fields of physics can be distilled in principle by compressing corresponding language models, and it's an interesting project to pursue. So my next chapter is called Hierarchical Decision Making, and it actually comes from my talk that I gave at Kabul Institute of Theoretical Physics. So I was trying to relate to what physicists do. So I was thinking about how does what I do relate to what physicists do, or to physicists' brain. And this is what I came up with. So this is just a general overview of reinforcement learning in the brain. So there's this remarkable discovery which was made in the 90s, that there are neurons, dopaminergic neurons in the brain in the area called VTA that encode reward prediction error. So essentially, these are perfect for backpropagation of that prediction error. So there are neurons that compute reward, the error in the predicted reward. Like, for example, if the animal is engaged in the classical conditioning task, and they're giving a buzz first, the sound, and then they're given a reward such as juice. In this case, it's a monkey. The dopaminergic neurons, when they receive a reward, will initially start responding with these spikes, and then after the monkey learns the association between the sound and the reward, they stop spiking at the time when the reward is delivered. They spike at the time when sound is delivered, which indicates that they are responding to a reward prediction error. And there is the other extension of this is if you give them buzz, but you don't give them the reward, the neuron will be depressed, which also confirms the idea that there are neurons that are responsive to reward prediction error. This idea was expanded to this new interesting direction, which is called motivational salience. So the idea is that obviously rewards are not absolute. So, for example, if you drink too much juice, maybe juice will not be as interesting or as rewarding to you anymore. And this is experiment in the region called ventral pallidum in basal ganglia, where neurons they have similar response. So if you, for example, give a rat in this case a sugary liquid, their neurons in ventral pallidum will be very happy. They will start spiking, and that's because rats, they really like sugar or sugary liquids. But rats generally don't like sodium or salt. So the neurons, if you give them buzz and then you say that, and then you will give them salt, they will not be happy. The neurons will not respond at all. Unless you don't give them salt, you have a sodium depleted diet where they actually need salt. In which case the neurons will fire again. So salt will become rewarding. So this experiment suggested that there are neurons in the brain that not only are responsive to absolute reward, but also to the subjective levels of reward. They respond to, if something is wanted, they will respond. If something is not wanted, even though it may be rewarded in different contexts, they will not respond. So this led to the idea of motivational salience, that the reward is actually not an absolute quantity, but something that depends on this motivation vector. And motivation vector, it represents, roughly speaking, the weights with which you are interested in different things. Are you interested in water? Are you interested in food, sodium, for example, and so on? Many other things, obviously. But so this motivation vector may change over time, and it basically determines your behavior. Like in the morning, you will wake up and you want coffee, but maybe closer to the evening, you will not want coffee as much. So we wrote the paper about, I was very excited about this idea, and we wrote the paper about and just applying it in some kind of AI reinforcement learning context. And I'm very happy. I'm very happy about this this publication. It was actually, it did explain responses of neurons in ventral pallidum, and also it explained the architecture, that different types of neurons. But the general framework is listed here. So it's a reinforcement Q-learning framework where you have a network, which is this green oval, which receives the state information, and it also receives the information, this motivation vector. And it's supposed to compute the action-reward pair, the Q function, which gives you the expected future reward as a function of different possible actions A. And then the idea is that the network will just pick an action that maximizes the future expected reward, and it will act and will change state. So that was our neural network of motivation. So the only difference between the conventional Q-learning network is that it also receives this motivation vector, which is a slowly varying variable that determines what the network is really interested in. So, but the reason why I was really excited about it is that this framework can give you some idea about the implementation of hierarchical reinforcement learning, because this motivation vector may actually be provided by the other network. In case of ventral pallidum, it is actually provided by some hypothalamic networks that are responsive for hunger and thirst. So some other network may compute the motivation, and the action of that network, which I call manager, is to change motivation from one state to another. And it can actually go higher, obviously. So you can have a higher level manager network that provides motivation to the manager, and so on. So the reason why I was so excited about this work is because I thought that this motivational salience and those ideas it is the way for the brain to evolve something like hierarchical reinforcement learning with existing architecture. And but then I also was thinking about how this can work for physics. So I think this is, if I want to solve a problem, if I need to solve a problem in physics, this is how my brain at least works. So first I pick a problem, right? So I want to solve a physics problem. And I have different preferences. And I don't know, but for some reason I really like to solve diffusion problems. And if I solve diffusion problems for a month, I will switch to other types of problems because I will be satiated with the diffusion problems. So, and then I look at this equation, I stare it, and the idea comes into my mind how to solve it. I don't really know why it comes from somewhere, but there is probably a network that will tell me that I probably should use Fourier transform to solve this one. And just because from prior experiences, my physics networks in my brain are trained to use Fourier transform in this particular context, but maybe if I'm in the mood, I will use Green's functions. And then I will take the lower level execution, the worker will take a pen and paper and will solve this equation. So I think motivational salience could be viewed, could be useful for implementing some RL networks that solve physics problems. this is the end of my second chapter, and maybe I should hustle on, but if somebody has a question, I will be happy to.
Yeah, let me see if there are any hands that shoot up. I'm not seeing anyone, so Alex, I think you're good to keep. Oh, wait, I do see a question now, so I'm gonna give Guru the chance to ask.
Hi, Alex. Very interesting till now. I was more interested in like the hierarchy of planner, like the planner, manager, worker. Does this translate to the current scenario of LLMs where we have? Because from what I remember, like recently, Cursor also conducted an experiment where they tried to create or code like a browser from scratch with like 1,000 agents, and at first they failed fantastically, but then when they implemented some sort of corporate structure there where they had an agent as a CEO, then some agent as project managers, and others as workers, the results were not as bad. So do you think like with the current stage of AI, would the learning, would it transfer with context, or do you mean like with more in a RL loop, like a loss training kind of loop over there?
I think like the ideas of hierarchical reinforcement learning, they are out there, and we are not the first to propose them. I think Richard Sutton gave a wonderful talk about oak architecture, options and knowledge architecture. Options is another form of hierarchy where you have a hierarchy of actions that are extended in time at Neurons. So he gave this talk. So it is not a novel idea. My idea here is that there is actually part of the brain that can implement this via motivational salience. So obviously each of those networks can be recurrent. And in our paper, we experiment with many tasks. I mean, you can read, there's actually flesh on those bones that I'm presenting to you. And including we have a reinforcement learning task. And we show that like a simple hierarchical network with 2 levels of hierarchy with worker and manager can solve, say, find shortest path in graphs quite well, like almost in the same way as like optimal solution. So I'm not sure if there is enough evidence to show that there is an advantage to hierarchy. Like obviously with enough data, even a network without structure can solve any problem. But maybe if you have like if you are evolving a more complex task, and you can first train the worker to move the pencil, and then you will, train at higher level with certain curriculum, you can benefit from hierarchical structure. I can imagine that the reason why I solve problems like that in physics is because I was taught like that. So it's possibly an artifact of curriculum. And again, this idea that my training was limited in time in physics by something like 20 years, but it is still limited. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but.
No, that clears a lot. That clears up a lot. Thank you.
Okay, let me present the last chapter, which is very short and very conceptual. I was thinking about imagination modules. So there's a bunch of evidence that people do solve complex tasks in the brain, just their imagination, even though they don't really acknowledge it. Like in this case, humans were asked if 2 things on the right and on the left are the same, and they differ in 3-dimensional angle of rotation. And out of those 3 pairs, I'll let you think about it for a second. Out of those 3 pairs, only 1 is actually an outlier where the 2 things are different on the right and on the left. Just enjoy solving puzzle. So and it turns out that the time that takes for people to solve this problem is proportional to the angle. Even though you may not acknowledge it, but mentally in solving these tasks, you actually rotate mentally things in your mind.
Alex, I just want to jump in for a second. It looks like we lost the feed to the PowerPoint that you were presenting. I don't know if you want to share your screen again.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Sorry about this.
No, not worry.
Yeah. So there is this task. I hope you can see it now.
Yep, looks good now.
So it turns out that the time that it takes for you to figure out if two objects are the same is proportional to the angle of rotation, which implies that you actually do three-dimensional rotation in your head, and you go through intermediate angles, presumably. So there's another example that, so this is solving mazes. When people were asked to solve mazes, and the idea here is that this is the entry point, and you're supposed to say which one is the exit point, 1, 2, or 3. So you need to go through the path. And what you can see here is the path of human eyes, that they go through the labyrinth to solve this puzzle and to say that the exit point is 2. And it turns out that the length of the fixation between 2 points, so people solve it by jumping eyes from point to point, and the positions of eye fixations are shown by those black dots. And the duration of your fixation is proportional to the labyrinth path between your current fixation point and the next fixation point. So which implies that in your mind, there is an attentional spotlight that even though your eyes are staring at the same point, there is a part of your mind that goes through the path and determines where to jump next. So this is just an idea that our brains are capable of complex manipulations, even though we don't really acknowledge that, and there is no physical manifestation of that. So in physics, there are a lot of interesting things that people gain from just imagining things in 3D. There are some useful diagrams, which are, sometimes they're called Feynman diagrams. There are also phase portraits like this diffusion, this renormalization group flow. There are some structures of crystals and so on. So there are many things in physics, many problems in physics that benefit from the visual display and imagining things in some number of dimensions, maybe beginning from 1 dimension to 11. So here's my attempt to invoke this imagination in a ChatGPT, and it is capable of producing some kind of abstract images that are representative of physics problems, but they are not very accurate. Like, for example, here there's a representation of energy. For some reason, the energy profile has a thickness, which I don't know why it does, but probably because it's a common image for a jar or something. Anyway, so these images could be made better. So I'm thinking that like a network that solves physics problems could benefit from something which I call imagination module. And this is just my very crude sketch of how this device could be organized. So you'd have a task description such as prompt with the problem. And then there is some kind of drawing algorithm. It could be some kind of expert system that draws it out, or it could be generative network, some diffusion network that will produce video or an image. And then there would be an evaluation network which will produce a score. The score would be, for example, how accurately the given 4-dimensional image replicates this task description, or how useful is the image for the task description or for solving the problem. So this is my very crude idea. I should say, though, that my observation is many physicists use their imagination, their spatial imagination, to solve problems, me included. I always imagine things, even equations. I imagine them in space. But I also met some brilliant physicists that do not have any visual imagination at all. Their thinking is purely algebraic, and I think it's just a different way of thinking from mine, and it's difficult for me to understand. But I think physics, especially theoretical physics, benefits from the entire spectrum of personalities, beginning from like extremely visual ones to the extremely algebraic ones. And I think it might be interesting to implement something like this, some module which has spatial imagination in physics, specialized physics networks. I'm sorry, this is like very conceptual, and it's mostly me freestyling about imagination. So this is my overview of my talk. I presented 3 chapters. I spoke about the compression of the models, in particular language models, and it can help figuring out distilled principles of physics. Then I was talking about hierarchical decision making and motivation, which could organize the way how information is organized in decision making, and also a potential for benefiting from imagination modules in physics networks. Thank you.